Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Numbers. I'm your host, Reid Stone. Alongside me is my co-host, Bob Foley, and our guest today is Robert Laura. Bob is a retirement activist and pioneer in the psychology and social science of retirement and legacy planning. He is a 7-time author. Most recently, he has released a book titled Retirement Intelligence, Personal Retirement Readiness that you see on my desk here. He is also a longtime nationally syndicated columnist, and many of you have probably read his articles in Financial Advisor magazine. He's the founder of the Retirement Coaches Association, the Certified Professional Retirement Coach, the CPRC designation, and the creator of the Retirement Intelligence or RQ assessment. As a former social worker turned retirement expert and author, Bob has found that retirement is the most fascinating yet least understood phase of life. As a result, he has developed a powerful message to tackle the mental, social, physical, spiritual, in addition to the financial aspects of retirement. Bob is also the founder of the Wealth and Wellness Group, a fee-based registered investment advisory firm in Michigan. Welcome, Bob. Glad to have you on the show with us. We've got a lot to catch up on. We've got your new book to talk about. We've got some research, the Great Retirement Disconnect that came out from the RCA last year. And we've got the recent Retirement Megatrends report for you to share some of those findings too. So lots to cover. You were, like I was telling you before we jumped on here, this is season 3 of our show, and Bob was our first guest. I looked back on season 1 and on season 2. So glad to have you kick off season 3 for us, Bob. Lots to catch up on.
Excited to be here with you guys again, and just appreciate the invite. And it's just good fun to connect with you guys and hang out here. And hopefully we've got 6 hours or 8 hours. That's how long we're going to be on here to cover all that stuff. But or in 45 minutes, we'll see what we can do. Looking forward to it.
I think we could easily cover that time, Bob. There's so many things that the three of us could talk about. I wanted to start with, from your bio, where you talk about retirement as the most fascinating but least understood phase of life. How did you come to that realization, and how did you begin to focus more on, as a financial advisor, how did you begin to focus and realize that the non-financial side was as equally, if not more so important than the financial side of retirement?
I was working with clients and they just told me stuff that I wasn't expecting. We all have these guideposts that's how we get to this concept of retirement coaching. And I had 2 incidents. One where a client said to me, it was a friend of mine, it was his dad, and he was recently retired. And we were hanging out remodeling a house, and he said to me, Bob, don't ever retire because you won't mean anything to anyone anymore. And I was like, what? Like, I was a young financial advisor at the time. Like, we're kind of told that retirement is the holy grail that everyone wants to get to, and he's saying don't ever retire because you won't mean anything to anyone. I was like, that did not make sense to me. And then when I grew up in Detroit, so a blue collar kid, one of my first clients was, not one of my first clients, it was kind of a year or 2 into it, but it was the first millionaire client that I had. And that money just was not, if you weren't part of the mafia or some kind of a gangster, you didn't have money in Detroit. But I asked this, there was a lady, I said to her, I said, what's the best investment you ever made? And she's like, the Craftmatic adjustable bed. And I'm like, what? Like, I wanted her to say like the great stock I have found or war bonds or something, thinking it would be financial, and it had nothing to do with money. It was really what gave her a good night's sleep. And I'm like, that's not an investment. So it was little things like that that kind of stood out. And then obviously spending time as an advisor, just seeing people who had plenty of money, but they were miserable. And you're like, it just didn't connect. And having been a social worker, that just really made me curious. And so I started asking a lot more questions, and it kind of led me down this rabbit hole to where we're at today.
I wanted to follow up on that too. And I think I got this from your book, but one of the things you talk about in your book when you're talking about what you took away from your time as a social worker and working with clients, and I think I've got this right, and I'll read it here. You said letting comments go unnoticed or unexplored was one of the things that I think you took away from that. And I think as retirement coaches, that's one of the things that I've learned too. It's pretty easy to talk to a client and ask them how retirement's going. And of course, they're going to say, oh, everything's fine, it's great. But we kind of have to learn how to dig beneath the surface because a lot of times people will say everything's great, but it's not great. So tell us kind of how you have learned that and applied kind of your experience from being a social worker now as a financial advisor and working with people on this non-financial side when they're not really telling us the whole story.
you know, I think that's what I appreciate about you guys too. Like just having had experiences with you and, done events and conferences and different things. Like you really have to be good at asking, you're a connoisseur of good questions.
Yeah,
And I think for me, what's interesting, the way you're trained as a social worker, you have to write down what are called SOAP notes. And so every time you meet with a client or do a group, you have to write, an S, which is the subject, the O, which was the objective of the time you spent with them, your assessment, and then the plan. Well, in the assessment, you can't say they were mad or they did this. You have to kind of chart body language. They raised their eyebrows, they sat back, they really leaned in. And so you really it taught me how to really read people's body language because I had to chart it. So you're paying attention to it, because I think whether you're in sales 101 or anything you've done, we talk about mirroring. But if you think about like I just really learned how to watch people's eyebrows, their mouth, the way they lean, if they talk to each, it's really important with couples. And so by kind of understanding that, I could, I don't want to say like, I'm not like some body language expert, but when people are like, oh, I'm busy, because that's the typical retirement. How's retirement going? Oh, it's the best thing ever. Wish I'd done
yeah,
years ago. Yeah, I'm busier than ever. And I want to say, no, you're not, you're lying. Not in a bad way, but like, it just really started it became so common. I'm like, there's something wrong with that. And then I just started asking, like, so it wasn't how's retirement going? What are
yeah,
some specific things that you're doing or really enjoying about retirement? And there's nothing. It's just quiet. Well, it's like, whoa, it's just kind of dancing around it. And I think that's really where I think the work that we're all doing that the financial services could really learn from is there's a soft skills deficiency, that they're not trained on this stuff. And, having been a financial advisor, I thought more people would go through the training that we've done and kind of put together, but they're not. And it's partially because they don't have that skill set. So I think it's really, you guys know this, I'm preaching to the choir, like really important to just be curious and kind of pay attention of like, yeah, that what you're saying is not lining up with what you're doing.
yeah,
And just being open to explore because it's not bad. It's not to say they're doing anything wrong, but they just don't know. I think they just don't know who they can talk to about it, or it's hard to be vulnerable. And so I think that's another thing that advisors or other people could learn is just how can you kind of share something or a time things weren't going well or you were vulnerable to kind of open that door as well.
yeah.
Put on your put on your horizon hat, okay, and take a look and tell us what you think retirement's going to look like 10 years from now.
I don't think it's going to look anything like it is. It's already starting to shift. We talked
Yeah,
about this, you kind of with what you're doing with your encore career, Bob. It's like I think more and more people are getting to a traditional retirement age, right? And so whether that's 55, 62, or 67 or 70, gas tank's not empty. Like it's not like all of a sudden like 30 or 40 years ago. And so people just they don't want to retire from work. They want to just have, something else. They want another not necessarily a full-time career. They want to have impact. They want to kind of live out with some passions. And so I think more and more often it's going to be this is my first, my second, or my third retirements. It'll be plural. And it won't mean an end, it'll mean a shift to another phase. And so I really, especially with Gen X turning 60 this year, they're the group that's really pushing this. Hey, I'm 55 or 60 or 65. I followed the script stinks, and I want something different. But because it is so different, like there's no like, hey, well, here's the sheet of paper, just do these three things, good luck. And even if you got a boatload of money, it doesn't mean you're happy. And so I see that being more and more specific, and I see that shrinking. Like now people are waiting until they're 65 or 62 to figure out what their encore career is. I think that's going to suddenly be 58, 55, 50 that they're going to build up to this point, but then want to shift because what good is it if you're miserable, you're grinding out your last few years for what? So I see really positive changes. And I think, again, it's harder and harder to save enough money to do nothing for 30 years, right? So are you going to just work, till work your tail off till 65 and then hope you can make it to 95? Or will you still work part-time in some way so you don't have to quit or save up too much money? Because I'll end with this, then I'll carry it on here, but like it doesn't do people any good to get to 65 and for them to hate their spouse, to not have a relationship with their kids, to be in lousy health, and for what? You got a pile of money now. You don't have any of these other things, so there's some trade-offs there that need to be
And,
fixed.
and I'll just add on to that too. The whole longevity factor. People are living longer. They're living healthier. Like you said, Bob, they really want to be more engaged longer because they're reaching this retirement age, but they're like, I'm healthy. I still want to do something. They may not want to do what they've been doing for the past 30 years, but they really need help in shifting to something different. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck because it's a blank canvas when you get to that point. And to be able to fill all your time with something that's meaningful is really difficult, I think, for people to figure out.
Yeah, I want to
And
hear, hey Bob, real quick. I want to hear from you, like on what you're seeing with that, like what people are saying, or how big of a shift they're making from it.
first of all, people are scared to death. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they know their runway is at its end, and they don't know when they're going to go over the side. And what they really want is they really don't want to get into. They really want to be able to control their exit, and they want to be able to. They want to be able to do something that's meaningful now with the time that they have, quote unquote, left. All right. And with that, many of them think that they want one thing, and then they get into a discussion with us and people like us, and then it comes out the other end, not necessarily totally different, but surprisingly different. That's what they talk about a lot. And it's the people that allow themselves to go through this, they're the ones that succeed. They're the ones that have fulfillment. But the majority of the population is out there. They're withdrawn. They're going through denial. They're watching 48 hours of TV. They're having too many beers, and it's
And
just it's incredible some of the things that go on.
And I will say real quick, because Reid, I love your one piece that you did with all those statistics, like that sheet that's like, I don't even know, it's like 500 pages long. I'm kidding, but it's so full of like, if like, if just corporations and groups read that, like it's like a
Yeah,
flashing sign of all these things that we're talking about. It's like, here is the
that's
statistical evidence of all of these things, and it's just not getting to enough people. And I know we're kind of getting there, but it's just like wake up to what's happening and be a part of it and like come together. So I don't know how they get that stats
thank,
thing, but that should be a
thanks
mandatory
for
read.
yeah, thanks for recognizing that, Bob. That's I think you're talking about the white paper I did last year,
Yeah.
no, actually a year and a half ago now, where that was one of the things that I started to notice was as I started reading all of these reports, and a lot of them were coming out of the financial services industry, telling advisors, look, here is how things are changing. Here is why people want to have conversations about life and retirement. It is not all about the money for people.
But that's
They
what
just
I
don't,
apologize. Yeah, it's
yeah,
what irks me though. Like, so we know what the problem is, but there's no solutions. Like, and then like I think it's funny, like the financial services industry, and I'm part of it, so don't get me wrong, but like, so you're gonna pay a firm to do some research that tells you all the problem, but then you're not gonna train your people or bring in people like to fix it. And so it's not
yep,
solution-based research. It's just like, hey, whoo, we got 5 pages of problems we found. Good luck.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we're just kind of pushing people out the door. But the commercials say hey, when you're happy and you have a pool and the grandkids are there, everything's going to be fine. But that's not true. It just
And,
drives me crazy. Sorry.
and that's exactly why I started to put this together, because I was seeing all of this research and I'm like, if you just start connecting the dots, people, you'll see that if you're a financial services firm, if you're a corporate organization, especially ones that are focused on wellness and helping people plan for retirement, that there's a lot of great information out there and different companies are doing great research. But that's the other piece that I put this together, because I believe there are solutions out there. And I think, the Retirement Coaches Association is part of that. And all of the retirement coaches who, are part of that can help be part of that solution. But I see it in articles being written too a lot of times, and it's by financial advisors talking about planning for life and retirement, and they'll talk about it at a very high level. You need to find purpose. You need to look at your health. You need to find social connections. But what they're not doing, so this reporting is coming out of the industry telling financial advisors, here's what you do. Here's the reporting. Now it's left up to the financial advisor to figure out how to implement it. And then at the second level, what's happening is some financial advisors are understanding this problem, but they're just sharing the problem with their clients with no solution behind it. And that's where I think that, the more work that the RCA does, the more work that I would say people writing about this. There's lots of books coming out about the topic too, but we're leaving it up to people to kind of figure it out on their own. It's like somebody wanting to lose weight and setting up a New Year's resolution, but not being able to follow through on it because it's all up to them to do. There's nobody supporting them. There's nobody guiding them. So
And I think people don't realize how significant of it's what I call SIS, suffer in silence, because
right,
that's what happens. Because the stigma is if you have enough money to not work and you have all the time to do whatever you want, that is a perfect life. You have made it, everything is great. That's just not true. And then that's the other stigma. Like the big stigmas I think in retirement is okay, so if you're 65 or 67 and you're still working, well, you either didn't start saving or you hate your family. Neither one are true if you found good balance, right? And then if you're retired, well, you have to be happy because the definition of happiness is time and money. It's not. If you lose routine, social connection, but who are you going to tell? Oh, how's retirement? Oh, it's terrible. I wish I was back at work at those terrible meetings with but I think it's kind of funny because yeah, you're not going to miss some of the meetings or some of the staff related stuff, but there are little components. And again, I think that's what I appreciate about the research, that the work that we're all doing. It's like we got to really crush those stigmas to say this is not true anymore, and we've got to look at it from a different perspective.
I can't tell you how many times I have the adult children of the retiree comes to me and says, can you help me with my dad, with my mom, with my uncle, with whoever? Okay. And I think that might be the opportunity place. All right. Is to get the message to them to try to influence their parent to move over. Now, I've suggested that to some of these adult children. And what's happened is they try their best, but the parent just isn't moving. And they're not moving towards it because they perceive that their social circles aren't. So there's got to be a way that we can get ourselves into the 55 plus communities, places like that, and tell everybody it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to talk to each other about these things because all we got is each other. Okay. Because our kids are busy. They have their careers. They're helping to raise their kids, our grandkids. Okay. And of course, our kids look at us as free daycare. Come on over. All right. And that's it. But the fact of the matter is that people still want purposeful lives. They want something that they can grab onto and say, I did that. They just really want to get themselves to the point where they're contributing rather than taking.
I think this is really important, and I know we can go on to your other questions. I think the biggest challenge is people are looking for purpose or hoping it hits them, but they're not finding it. Like retirement's not a feeling. I talk about this. Like you can't feel your way into something. What are you doing? Do something. You got to get out there. You got to go to new places. You got to meet new people. You have to, and that's not everyone's personality. You don't have to do all of those things, but your feelings are better dictated by what you're doing than the other way around because nobody feels like going to the gym, but you got to go and you feel better after you go. And so it is just putting one foot in front of the other, not being lofty about this or over reflective. Like you can't be a mental country club. You're just sitting around thinking about stuff all day. Do something, get moving. And again, I think that purpose point is so important because you don't have to have some amazing purpose that shocks and amazes everyone when you bring it up, but you just have to feel it and be doing something about it.
One of the things I want to ask both of you about is how do we make this okay for people to talk about? How can financial advisors make this okay for clients to talk about? Because Bob, what you were saying, I think people feel like they can't talk about it because they think everybody else is fine and everybody else is happy in retirement when I shouldn't say everybody, but I think you could say if you had a group of people that, and you probably have stats on this, Bob, from some of the research, but I'm guessing if you had a group of 10 people, that there'd probably be at least 50% of those people who are probably in some form or fashion struggling in retirement, trying to figure it out.
Well,
So
I
how do
think
we,
it's so different. Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think, we all live like the Facebook life. Like when you look at people on Facebook, you're like, oh my, quick story, like my a friend of ours, like their neighbor, he has two boats. He has a Corvette. He's got awesome clothes. Like on paper, this guy is amazing, but he lives at his mother-in-law's house. So he doesn't have to have him, so it looks like he's got a giant house with two boats and three cars, and you're like, dude, you live with your mom still, and you're like 60. So I think there's this perception out there. And so I think the biggest thing is cohort learning. We're
yeah,
hoping my wife Amy and I to do a retreat later this year. We don't have all the details, and I'm not like announcing it here, but I think retirement coaches in general can really start to look at ways to host a retreat where, 10, 15, 20 individuals or couples come together and there's a process for it, so it's not like therapy or anything like that, but where you can have professionals come in to talk about important topics like longevity, like purpose, like replacing your work identity, but then there's the opportunity for them to connect because even when I do a workshop or a presentation, on everything I do, there's a question, what do you wish there was more time for? And I desperately wanted to say, I wish there was more time to hear from Bob and his funny jokes and all his amazing insights, but it never says it. It always says, I wish there was more time to talk to other people. And that's what they want. They want to know, like your point, Bob, like they're definitely afraid, and everyone's afraid to make a mistake. Like they think retirement's a do or die decision. Like I got one shot, I got to get this right. Not true. And so I think as we as the experts have to bring these people together to have a process to bring these things up, but then we got to give them time to hang out, talk, and normalize it with each other. And again, I think that does a couple things. It educates them, and then it helps build a tribe. Meaning that they kind of, especially if it's just over a weekend, you can still make really good connections in a short period of time. So I think that is going to be a really significant thing. And there's a group out in University of Denver that they're offering like a 6-week course. They're actually using my book, Retirement Intelligence, Purposeful Aging, I think it is. But they're I think college campuses are going to start doing it too. Like if enrollments are down, where do you tap into? And so I think it's going to be a really, really important thing, I think, going forward.
What you're talking about is social change. And
Mhm.
every significant social change always begins in the academic community. So that's why when you talk about the University of Denver, you talk about what's going on at MIT, out at Stanford, out at USC, places like that. It's starting to happen. All right. But the thing is, why does it happen? It happens because they have the time to do the research, and they publish the research, and they put it into their curriculums in their different schools. So we have an entire population out there that is thirsty for knowledge. So it's all a question of how do you put it together? How do you wrap it so that it connects it connects with them? What advice do you have, Bob, for us to get to that point?
We have to put it out there, because again, I think even when I started this work, like, some of the records I hold are amazing. Most canceled workshops, most no shows, especially because, I think people have to see it, 5 to 7 times. We know, from
Yeah,
traditional marketing or average. And this is the interesting thing about so much of what we know about people and human behavior has not been applied to retirement like that. Like, if we're going to start to do this and offer a workshop or retreat, like, I do not expect my first retreat to sell out. I expect my 10th one to, because people will have seen it that many times, will finally feel the opportunity to do it. So I think it is putting it out there. And I think that's another big challenge when you're pioneering an industry. You guys know, like, you gotta have some thick skin to put stuff out there and know that you're
yeah,
not, Reid, how long have you been doing your newsletter and other things? Like, you gotta put in the time,
yeah,
and let people see it. And again, when I started doing this 15 years ago, people thought I was an idiot. Not that I'm not one anymore, but I'm less of one 15 years later, because people are starting to see it. And so I think it's, to your point, Bob, how do we expedite the visualization of it or the implementation of it? And I think it's more of us doing more things. And again, that's why I appreciate you guys being part of the Retirement Coaches Association, because that's what I think we do best, is when we come together, we're not competitors, we're bringing our best ideas. And I think that's it, is just, we got to start doing more workshops. We got to start infiltrating more organizations. We got to start soft skill training advisors, I think, are really important.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is the use of social media and the use of going onto LinkedIn and just doing simple messaging to targeted people is really starting to pay off. And maybe it's just that simple. All right. Maybe it's stop trying to piggyback on companies and on financial advisors and other people like that, and just go direct. And through an organization like the Retirement Coaches Association is a great way to do it.
And I think too, you brought this up before, just pushing public policy. Again, like, why doesn't Social Security Administration have a retirement orientation? You get benefits at 62, you should be doing this. Same with companies that have mandatory retirement ages. Like, you don't have, or you're going to get a buyout offer. You shouldn't be able to take a buyout offer until you take a retirement orientation class, because again, you get out, you got to, hey, look at all this money I got, pay for a year. Well, okay, you're going to be miserable, but sounds good.
or
Absolutely.
as part of the outplacement process.
Yes.
I mean, that should be just something. I think the whole thing that has to happen is it has to become part of the normal part of planning for retirement. It's because all of the messaging, or most of the messaging that all of us see, is all about the financial side. Do I have enough money? Will it last long enough? That's the message that people are hearing over and over, and they need to hear this other side, because to me, the two sides have to go together. I don't know how a financial advisor can plan for how much somebody needs for retirement when they haven't talked about how long they might live, when they talk to them about what they want to do in retirement, because there's lots of costs that could come up. And if those two, if you don't know that, I don't know how the financial side can be accurately planned for.
Well,
So,
but I think we get caught up in status quo conversations. How long are you going to live? Well,
right,
and this is a typical baby boomer conversation. Well, I'm going to make it to 85, and if I say, like, as a planner, like, no, we're going to plan to be 90 or 95. Like, well, if that happens, just take me out back and shoot me. I don't want to live that long. And you're like, what? You can't. No, nobody's doing that. And I think it's this assembly line thinking that, like,
right,
well, mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, they lived to 85, but they got sick at 82, so they were miserable for the
right.
last 3 years. Well, just because you could have lived to 95 doesn't mean you're going to get sick at 82 and be miserable for 13 years. And so I think that's where advisors again have to change the conversation, because again, I bring this up in the book and I talk about it all the time. It's not that we're living longer, it's really the conversation. It's taking longer for us all to feel old. And that's a more empowering conversation because what does that mean? Because it doesn't mean that we're going to shorten up your numbers or you're going to spend more because you're going to not make it to 85. But how do you really live out those years better when you're feeling this way? So honoring where they're at, not the status quo or where we think things be or where they have been because they're not there anymore.
Yep. Yep. So I want to dive back into a few points in your book, Bob, and have you comment on those. And I like that you begin chapter one with two, I think, very important points that people need to understand. And I want you to kind of talk about these with us. And the first one, and I've heard you say these many times, but the first one is the fear of running out of money pales in comparison to the possibility of running out of family, friends, good health, or time. And the second one is retirement is backward. So comment on both of those and explain to us how retirement is backwards or planning for retirement is backwards.
Yeah, when I was writing for Forbes, I started interviewing a bunch of people. I'm like, shoot, I got the Forbes credential. I'm gonna start interviewing celebs or well-known people. So Rick Warren, who wrote the Purpose Driven Life, a very popular book. He's a preacher out in California. When I was talking to him, he had said, he goes, whenever I'm at, he's been at the bedside of, 1,000 people passing away. He goes, they never ask for their financial advisor. They don't ask for their deed or to review their stock market portfolio. They ask for their family and friends and what's important to them.
Yeah.
And I think that, is really important because I do think that another flaw with retirement is people assume that just because they're retired that they have 30 or 40 years to do whatever they want whenever they want. And that's just not true. And again, I think it's interesting with the political environment here, no matter which side you're on, what's going to happen, or is the stock market going to crash, or tariffs are causing taxes? Oh my gosh, like none of it matters if you're not here. And I guarantee your kids or your family will spend your money so fast you won't even know what happened. And so it really is about pulling back to what is important. And again, so many people put things on the back burner, they procrastinate getting like, when I get to retirement, I'm gonna live my best life. Bad idea. Because if you don't have a strong relationship with your spouse, it's the best way to lose 60% of your portfolio because 40's going to the other person, 20's going to the attorneys. And same with like now I'm ready to spend time with my kids. Well, you don't have a relationship with them. Well, I'm ready to start working out. No, you're not because you're not healthy and it's not easy to do. And so you really have to stop focusing so much on what happens if there's a stock market crash or if I spend too much money, I'm going to be homeless. You're going to be alone and isolated if you aren't really careful about the other things. And so don't wait to live your best life once you're in retirement. Start it now, retire with it instead of assuming that you can create it. So that's why I think financial becomes secondary. And again, if we talk about mental, social,
Yeah.
physical, spiritual, financial, five things, money only represents 20%. So you've got to focus on the other 80 along the way as well.
So one of
Okay.
your other chapters, chapter 5, I want you to talk about this too, because I think this is something that is talked about in relation to the financial side of retirement, but it really isn't talked about on the non-financial side. And so chapter 5 in your book is called The Science Side, and it talks about how behavioral economics and positive psychology can be used to help people make better decisions about retirement. You also, this was highlighted in one of your recent financial advisor articles titled The Science Side of Retirement. So tell us about these two areas and how that can help people plan for life and retirement. Behavioral
So,
economics and positive psychology.
so in financial services, there's two sides. There's the hard side and the soft side. Most people are focused on the hard side, as you might expect. That's the
Yep.
numbers, the dollars and cents, and the strategies around that. The soft side is the touchy-feely stuff that should be put over there and cannot, well, many people assume be monetized the same way you can sell a product or a service. And so there's this big disconnect between the hard side and the soft side that nobody wants to delve into. And people kind of assume the soft side is, tell me, how are you feeling? What are you thinking about? Or that, Reid or Bob, you guys are going to show up at a coffee shop and give a 45-minute, Tony Robbins speech to rah them up. That's not it. And I think that if we replace the soft side with the science side, And there's actual framework for helping people make a better transition, because we know from psychology and social sciences how people make decisions, what they think about, where they're flawed. We know what people want. They want to be happy, healthy, and connected. And so, if there's existing models that we know paid therapists and professionals use all around the globe, well, why don't we apply that to retirement? And why don't we apply that first? Again, going back to the last point, like that's why retirement's backwards, because we focus on the money and then the person, but money's complex, and that's why people procrastinate. This is part of behavioral economics. When things are complex, people procrastinate. So let's take the problem off the table. Let's remove the procrastination about the what if or the how much. What's important to you? What do you want to do? When your values are clear, your decisions are easy. And so, as we start to pivot to the science side, we can use things like PERMA. This comes from positive psychology, that we know people thrive in life when they have positive emotion, engagement, meaning, relationships, and accomplishments. And so it's easy. The three of us could talk about where we get those things right now. But when you're retired, now where are you getting them? Because if you don't, you have a major void. And so, why do we let people hit that void? Because they feel and think they're going to feel happy in retirement because they made it, right? They got to this finish line. They're happy, but then they don't have any of those things. And so they feel out of sorts, but they can't tell anyone. So we create these voids. They waste the first 2 to 3 years trying to figure it out on their own. Eventually they do, but then the cycle just repeats. And so, and I think too, the whole point about behavioral economics is decision making. When you have the right amount of information, the right information, all of the information, and feedback and insights, you make better decisions. I think if a lot of people went through the retirement coaching process more often and had a non-financial plan, they may choose not to retire if they have all of the
All
information.
the
And so,
information.
again, it's really, how do we build these models, or not even build them? We know they work. Why are we not applying them? And again, financial advisors don't have to be psychologists. You can partner with a retirement coach or just have some basic things. It doesn't mean you got to do 30 sessions before someone's ready, but just being aware of it and having some framework is very, very valuable.
Yep.
How do you think, for a financial advisor who tends to be transactional in their thought process, relationships, of course, mean something to them, but how do we help them to take that relational side of things and bring it more to the fore? Because the other side of things is, I take a look at what they do, and I take a look at many times they'll go after the relationship side with one or the other of the couple. And then what happens when that person passes away and the other person is still here? That person many times picks up and walks away. So what's the best way to engage the couple and as a couple and as individuals in order to get them ready for any eventual transition?
Well, so I think a number of things are important for financial professionals. Like, call it what it is. If you're not good at it, outsource it, bring someone else in. I think there are a lot of tools and other things that, like, if I was a financial advisor, I'd be stealing Reid's newsletter every month. I am an advisor, but I don't steal your newsletter, Reid. But there's just good stuff in there that you could, like, you don't have to, every time a client comes in, have a 45-minute session about what's going on. I think you can use
Right.
things like articles and newsletters. Like my newsletter has a market recap on it, and on the back is a non-financial article
Yep.
about retirement. And then I have a did you know and trivia. When clients come in, guess what they never talk about? My market recap. They don't care. And that's where I think advisors get things wrong, is there's a difference between what a client wants to know and what they want to talk about. They want to know their money is safe. They want to know it's doing things right. But they want to talk about their kids, their grandkids, their dog, their house, their cottage. And so I think it's just starting to build in a process. And where I tell most advisors to start, don't start with existing clients, because you've kind of set the stage already with them, right? That now all of a sudden you're going to reverse course and start talking about it. So the lowest barrier for financial professionals to step into retirement coaching, in my opinion, is when they bring on new clients. They can start a new path, a new trend, and they can warm up to it. Then they can kind of shuffle into here's a newsletter, or here's a free guide, or hey, we're going to do a workshop on this topic. And they can build momentum over a year with their existing clients. And again, because the new clients are new, they don't know anything new or know that anything is different.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that the first question that I ask people when I have conversations with them is, what do you want your legacy to be? And that's when you get stone cold silence and that dumb look on their face going, geez, I really don't know. Well, then what the hell are you going to do for the next 30 years? Okay.
Well, but your point is that I do think that's good for advisors, because advisors technically are used to talking about estate planning, right?
Right.
Like, who are your beneficiary designations? And,
Right.
the interesting thing about legacy is you can have more personal conversations, because you're going to be like, well, this kid's a spendthrift and this kid's this. And like, so you can, it's a great place to start as well, because there's already some comfort and some personal experience there. And then to branch that out. So I love that point.
I want to cover another section of your book, Bob, and just have you comment on a couple of things. But you talk about the top 10 things no one tells you about retirement, and you have the list in your book. I just want you to cover a couple of those, and I'll mention a couple of them, and you choose which ones you want to talk about. But you talk about things like retirement is empty and the wrong top 10 list. And I like number 9, which is stop saying retire to something, which is a phrase that I hear kind of repeated over and over and over. And so do you want to comment on any of those, or
Yeah, that
any
last
different
one's really
ones?
important. Yeah, that the one you just mentioned, the retire to, because it's cliche. Like, and kind
Yeah.
of we all use rules of thumb to get someplace, but at some point, rules of thumb become rules of dumb. And you're like, well, what are you going to retire to? And you kind of think you're being crafty with it, but it does not align with what we know about how people make decisions, right? Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. First, we make our habits, then our habits make us. And so, if we know that's the case, why are we going to wait to kind of create our ideal life once we get there? You shouldn't retire to something, you should retire with it. Now, granted, you're working, you have other things going on, but if you're not working out beforehand, if you're not eating healthy, if you're not spending time with your wife, if you're not spending time with your kids, you're not going to magically do it just because you're retired. And so, this idea that it's like retirement becomes the world's biggest New Year's resolution. Like, what do you do before New Year's? Spend money, eat food. What do most people want to do? Stop. And so now whoa, when I get to retirement, there comes my best life, man. It is going to be, I can't even tell you how amazing it's going to be. No, it's not. It's not going to be amazing because you're not doing anything before you get there. And so, this idea that you should retire with it, and I'll bring up this point even further. With the retirement intelligence assessment, what we really look at is personality. So a lot of people think that when they retire, they're going to become someone new and different. That you step over this magical line, the heavens open up, and you're this new person. Well, you're not. You're you times two. If you've got bad habits, if you sit on the couch, if you visit the refrigerator too much, if you watch TV when you're bored, you're just going to do more of it. You're not going to be different. And so we know that people who go into retirement already knowing where they're going to volunteer, already working out, spending time with kids, working part time here, they keep doing it. Everyone else stalls out. They kind of fluster around, get into some maladaptive or some bad cycles, and then they got to break out of them. And so if you go in with, you're going to be much better off to accomplish it.
Perfect. I want to ask you about the RCA recently came out with retirement mega trends for 2025. Just comment, if you will, on again, I won't have you go through all of them, but comment on number 4, which I thought is really interesting. And that one was, or is, retirement lifestyle planning will gain in popularity.
It already is.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of firms I'm working with where they hired a chief purpose officer. So that's just their version of retirement coaching. Another firm brought me in. They did one of their they had like a 3-day training session, and I was there for an entire day explaining the psychology of retirement and just imparting, again, they're not walking out retirement coaches, but if they got a new checklist or a couple little things to kind of guide them just to wake people up to it, or again, they can send out a newsletter. So it's already happening, and so it's just how quickly it gets magnified. And I think what's really is important is that so much of advisors and even companies they're all about being different, or ahead of the curve. Well,
Mhm.
it's gonna come fast, and if you're not ahead, you're gonna be left behind really, really fast. And it's shocking to me because so I've been an independent advisor since 2010. I have built my entire practice not talking about money. Um, when everyone else, and how awkward too when you're networking, like, oh, you want me to do a portfolio review, or you look like you need some insurance. I'm kidding, but like you're like that doesn't work. But if you're like, hey, you want me? Can I send you my guide how to prepare your marriage for retirement? Yeah. Or would you like to know three things no one tells you about retirement, like with the book or other things? And so
Yep.
it's way, way lower. And again, I was surprised when I created the certification back in 2017. I thought 70 or 80% of the people going through it would be advisors, trying to get a leg up, trying to be innovative and trying to leverage this because I was modeling it. That didn't
Yep.
work. Or actually, I mean, advisors already wear a lot of hats, and a lot of them don't want another hat. And so I really see that they're just going to start handing it off. And so we're seeing them either bring in an outsider and in a couple cases, they're bringing them on full time. So it's not like,
Yep.
hey, stick around or we'll contract with you. They're full time people, or they are converting someone that's an existing staff person that may already have an existing role, but they may not see, depending upon how big they are, how many people will go through that process. So they're training someone internally, and that allows them to kind of test out the concept. But at the end of the day, if a firm does not have someone appointed as a retirement coach, they will get left behind. And this is again the thing you're going to be seeing more and more from me and from kind of the association is, does your advisor talk about more than money? And do they have the training to support it? And again, the training is just not have they gone through it, but are they sending regular updates or information about improving your life, not just your portfolio? And so if you can't answer that question, that you don't have the training or experience to talk about more than numbers, you're going to get left behind real fast.
And the other thing is too, is that retirees or people who are about to retire, or people who just want to invest in their retirement, expect that their financial advisor will advise them on the soft side too, because if they're not, then they just figure it must not be important. So
Well,
there's, go ahead, yeah.
That's what our research says. In the retirement disconnect, we talk about that a lot of pre-retires, because I mean, at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. If you don't have kids and you're about to have your first kid, nobody can tell you enough of what you need to know. So I think people approaching retirement think, well, I got the money right. That's what I've been told, so I'm going to get it right. But retirees say, I think the number was 91% of retirees think a financial advisor should be talking about the non-financial, and I think it's 86% think HR should. And so that's just a difference between been there, done that, got a t-shirt, that there are these massive disconnects on what people think they need and what they actually do need. And that's why we did that research to kind of point out, like, hey, we need to do some rear view mirror, analysis here and say, what have we been missing? And then make sure we don't set these people up for failure.
So
Yep.
Reid, now that we've totally taken your plan and blow it to hell, what are the final thoughts do you have for us?
No, I was just going to toss it over to Bob. We're about at the end of the time. We could talk. I know the three of us could sit here and talk for 2 or 3 more hours easily on this. But Bob, is there anything before we end today that you'd like to, any last thoughts, anything that we didn't get to cover, any points you want to make?
Well, stay tuned for next year because hopefully I'll be the first guest again next year. Um,
You
um,
probably will.
and I
You're right.
apologize if I,
Book
yeah,
them now,
and I
Reid,
apologize.
book them now.
I may have to. His calendar is going to
Uh,
get booked here if I don't.
and I think, I apologize too, because I know I get fired up about stuff that people feel like I was yelling at them when I was kind of barking this stuff out. And I was being somewhat cynical to not say these things. And so I think take some of those things with a grain of salt. But I think people need a disruption, right? They need to get off autopilot. They need to hear some of these things and have that aha moment, but not just hear it, but do something about it. Whether it's subscribing to this podcast, which I think you guys do a great job of, your newsletter Beyond the Numbers. Like, you just got to keep getting these juicy little bits of pieces out there. Follow you guys, follow myself out there, but really, it is about you and taking care of yourself. And so, if you prioritize that first, put the money to the side, focus on you and start taking steps forward. Follow the podcast, follow you guys, follow, get connected with a retirement coach. I think you'd be surprised at how valuable it really, really is.
Perfect. I want to share Bob's contact information with everyone. A little bit more information about Bob.
This is a list of, if you can't fall asleep at night, here's some websites to visit, some books to read, better than melatonin and magnesium. I'm going to start packaging my material up like that. I can't fall asleep at night here. But, if you are, a lot of people are just interested in the concept of retirement coaching. You can check out certifiedretirementcoach.org, and you can take the first module for free. It doesn't mean you have to become a coach, but I think it'll just kind of open up your eyes into really what we do, and how valuable it is for these people, for coaches who go through this to get the training, because you really know more about retirement than most people. RC is a great website, Retirement Coaches Association. Again, we'd love to have people join us because it's a great group of people. We do a couple conferences a year. You can take the RQ assessment, but I'd buy the book, Retirement Intelligence, because there's a code in there to take that price off. And that's probably the best bet, is just you can buy the book at Amazon. And then if you have questions, feel free to email me. That's at the bottom there. And pretty easy to get a hold of. LinkedIn's another good place to connect with me too. So really appreciate you guys showing this and being a part of this.
Perfect. Thanks again, Bob, for joining us and sharing all of that valuable information.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.